On 6 July 1945, Joseph Stalin stood alone with his thoughts. The war had shifted again, the world waited. And the air inside the Kremlin felt heavier than usual. In the shadowed halls, he listened to distant reports. His pipe burning low, while history pressed in from every direction. Across Europe, soldiers bled and marched. Cities lay in ruins, and alliances trembled under secret plans. Stalin wasn't thinking of speeches or parades. He was calculating power, survival, and betrayal. Only months earlier, Winston Churchill had leaned forward. Cautious but confident, delivering news of D-Day. His eyes carefully watching Stalin. The message described landings planned for 6 June 1944, beaches bristling with risk. A gamble for liberation. For Stalin, this wasn't triumph, it was calculation. The Red Army carried the burden, and trust was fragile. He measured Churchill's words against casualties at Stalingrad. Against promises made and broken. Against the map of a future yet to come. Every smile in that room hid suspicion. Every pause hinted at leverage. And the clock of war ticked relentlessly. Stalin responded with calm approval, sharp restraint. His eyes betrayed nothing. What he truly thought would surface later. In decisions carved into borders and in the fate of nations. On that night, the alliance held by necessity, not trust. And the path to division had quietly begun. The memory lingered back to 28 November 1943. Inside Tehran, where chandeliers swayed above guarded smiles. Churchill spoke carefully. Roosevelt watched silently. And Stalin absorbed every promise without comment. When D-Day was mentioned again, months later, Stalin recalled delays, excuses, and rivers of Soviet blood. The Eastern Front had consumed millions. Villages vanished overnight. And Moscow demanded relief from the West. Churchill framed the invasion as bold and imminent. Yet Stalin heard echoes of postponement, caution, and calculation. In his mind, Normandy was not salvation, it was overdue recognition of Soviet sacrifice. He nodded politely, tapped ash from his pipe, and offered words that sounded cooperative but felt cold. Behind that restraint, Stalin was already planning post-war dominance. Shaped by memory and mistrust. He believed allies respected strength alone, and weakness invited betrayal. History had taught him that brutally. As Churchill spoke of beaches and paratroopers, Stalin pictured tanks rolling toward Berlin, unstoppable, uncompromising. The balance of power was shifting, not with speeches, but with territory seized and armies positioned. That night, Stalin authorized offensives, pressed commanders harder, and prepared to finish the war on his terms. D-Day would matter, but the Red Army would decide Europe's fate. And that much was clear to him. When the meeting ended, handshakes exchanged, cameras flashed. The alliance looked intact from afar. Yet beneath the surface, lines were already being drawn, quietly, deliberately, without mercy. By 4 February 1945, the war's end loomed near. And Stalin arrived at Yalta with iron certainty. Snow-covered Crimea, guards lined the palace. And the air carried exhaustion mixed with ambition. Churchill spoke again of Normandy, of shared victory. Of unity forged under fire and sacrifice. Stalin listened, remembering D-Day not as rescue, but a strategy delayed until Germany weakened. The Red Army stood deep in Eastern Europe, boots planted firmly. Cannons aimed westward, politically loaded. Every mile gained meant influence. Every city liberated meant control. And Stalin intended permanence. When Churchill invoked cooperation, Stalin countered with facts, territory won. Losses endured, leverage earned. He spoke calmly, almost warmly. Yet every word reinforced dominance and unspoken conditions. Poland, Germany, and borders yet unnamed hung between sentences. Shaped by power rather than principle. Stalin no longer needed reassurance. The battlefield had answered every doubt he once held. D-Day had opened the front. But the Soviet advance would close the war, that was his truth. Churchill sensed it too, in pauses and glances. Realizing the alliance was nearing its limit. The war against Hitler was ending. But another contest had already begun, quieter, colder. Stalin rose from the table confident. History bending toward his design. Consequences deferred but inevitable. Outside, the snow fell silently. As Europe's future hardened beneath unseen lines and guarded smiles. On 8 May 1945, victory echoed across Europe. Yet Stalin felt no celebration, only confirmation. Berlin had fallen to Soviet hands, streets burned and silent. The Reich shattered at enormous cost. As news spread westward, Churchill praised unity, while Stalin assessed what unity had truly delivered. He remembered D-Day again, not with bitterness, but with cold historical judgment. The Western landings had mattered. Yes, but timing had shaped outcomes, and outcomes shaped power. In Moscow, maps were unrolled nightly. Borders adjusted with pencils. Futures decided without witnesses. Stalin spoke little of gratitude. Instead, he spoke of security, buffers, and sacrifices repaid. Eastern Europe stood occupied by Red Army divisions, exhausted but loyal. Symbols of irreversible presence. When Western leaders requested elections, autonomy, and restraint, Stalin replied with assurances, but never specifics. He had learned from history that words dissolve, while armies endure and enforce reality. D-Day had proven the Allies' capability, but also their caution, a lesson Stalin would not forget. Behind closed doors, Soviet officials discussed reconstruction, reparations, and ideological alignment. The war's end did not soften Stalin, it sharpened him. Refining instincts forged in paranoia and loss. What Churchill once announced as liberation, Stalin measured as opportunity secured through endurance. The alliance that defeated Hitler still existed on paper, but trust had already collapsed into silence. The next phase would not begin with gunfire, but with influence, pressure, and invisible confrontation. By 17 July 1945. At Potsdam, Stalin arrived composed, victorious, quietly dominant. Truman had replaced Roosevelt. Churchill would soon depart, and Stalin sensed leverage growing. He recalled D-Day quietly, measuring gratitude against gain, patience against opportunity. Across the table, Churchill warned politely of spreading influence, of fading trust. Stalin responded with assurances, promises of elections, smiles that revealed nothing. Privately, he instructed Molotov, secure borders first, concede words later. The Red Army remained positioned eastward, a silent argument no diplomat could refute. Stalin believed history favored endurance, not sentiment, and he trusted steel over paper. D-Day, now, seemed distant, a necessary move, but never a moral awakening. Power would decide peace terms, rebuild nations, shape ideologies for generations. By 2 August 1945, talks strained further. Patience thinned, suspicion hardened. Stalin watched Truman closely, noting confidence, testing limits, storing reactions. The wartime partnership had served its purpose, victory achieved, debts remembered. Soon the world would divide quietly, not by speeches, but by fear. Stalin felt ready for that future, hardened by war, confident in control. The words spoken about D-Day still echoed, but consequences were only beginning. On 6 August 1945, a blinding flash over Hiroshima reached Stalin through coded cables and silence. He showed no shock, only quiet confirmation. The balance had shifted, urgency deepened. At Potsdam, Stalin masked concern, nodded thoughtfully, concealed the race already underway. The atomic bomb changed everything, yet reinforced what D-Day had taught him about timing and power. Western strength emerged suddenly, decisive and terrifying, and Stalin refused to be left behind. He ordered Soviet scientists forward, resources unlocked, secrecy absolute, deadlines unforgiving. While Churchill faded from power, Stalin endured, rooted in systems designed to outlast individuals. He reflected on Churchill's words about D-Day, courage framed by caution, strength delayed until advantage assured. That lesson burned clearly now: never rely on promises. Only on capabilities you control. Across Eastern Europe, Soviet influence hardened, governments aligned. Dissent quietly removed. The Red Army withdrew selectively, never completely, leaving structures loyal and dependent. Stalin justified every move as defense, the memory of invasion still raw, shaping every decision. He believed history rewarded those who prepared early, struck decisively, trusted no one. The wartime alliance dissolved, not with anger, but with calculation and silence. D-Day had opened a front, but Hiroshima opened an era. Colder, far more dangerous. Stalin stared at the future, grim but confident, resolved never again to be surprised. The world stepped unknowingly into a shadow conflict, shaped by moments spoken softly years earlier. By 5 March 1946, the tone of the world had shifted, and Stalin felt it immediately. Churchill, now out of office, stood in Fulton, Missouri, and spoke of an iron curtain descending. Those words traveled fast, carried across radios, newspapers, finally into Stalin's guarded circle. He listened without surprise. Only irritation: the accusation had made public what was once private tension. To Stalin, this was not betrayal, but inevitability. The alliance had expired with the war. He remembered Churchill speaking of D-Day. Cautious cooperation wrapped in strategic delay. Now that caution had transformed into warning, warning into confrontation. Stalin responded through Pravda, sharply, accusing Churchill of warmongering, imperial arrogance. The language was harsh, but calculated, meant to solidify positions at home and abroad. Across Eastern Europe, loyalty was tested, opposition weakened, alignment enforced more openly. The memory of invasion, still raw, justified every tightening grip in Stalin's mind. He believed security demanded control, and control demanded ideological unity. D-Day once symbolized Allied action, now it marked the beginning of separation. The front lines were no longer beaches and rivers, but speeches, influence, fear. Stalin prepared for a long struggle, economic, political, psychological. The war that followed Hitler would not be brief or loud, but it would shape generations. And in Stalin's calculations, it had begun the moment Churchill first spoke of Normandy. On 24 June 1948, Berlin became the next proving ground, silent, yet explosive. Stalin watched reports closely, the city surrounded. Tension rising, patience thinning. The Western Allies refused to retreat, airlifting supplies, defying pressure without firing a shot. To Stalin, this echoed D-Day again, resolve shone late, but dramatically, under global scrutiny. He tested limits carefully, never pushing into open war, always measuring response. Berlin was leverage, not conquest, a signal of strength and warning combined. Planes droned overhead daily. Civilians waited anxiously, the world held its breath. Stalin calculated risk relentlessly. Nuclear weapons now in play, mistakes unforgivable. The blockade strained resources, but revealed Western commitment, sharper than before. He lifted the blockade eventually, not from weakness, but from strategic reassessment. The message had been sent, lines clarified, spheres acknowledged. Germany would remain divided, like the world itself, fractured by ideology, memory. D-Day once unified armies, Berlin now separated them permanently. Stalin saw the Cold War crystallize, not as chaos, but as a new order. Conflict would continue without direct battle, governed by fear, deterrence, influence. He accepted this reality, shaped by lessons learned from wartime alliances. By 29 August 1949, a Soviet test lit the Kazakh steppe, and Stalin finally smiled. The atomic monopoly had ended, balance restored. Vulnerability reduced through grim perseverance. Years earlier, Churchill spoke of D-Day as shared courage, but Stalin saw competition beneath cooperation. Now competition defined everything. Deterrence replaced trust, fear enforced restraint. The news reached Washington quickly. Alarms sounded, calculations shifted overnight. Stalin remained outwardly calm. yet internally affirmed every suspicion he had ever held. Power respected power. This was the lesson written in blood, steel, radiation. The Red Army no longer needed to advance. Influence now traveled through ideology, threat. Eastern Europe remained locked, governments aligned. Dissent suppressed, borders sealed. D-Day felt distant now, almost symbolic, a moment that delayed, but never altered, destiny. Stalin believed the West acted only when forced, and now force existed on both sides. The Cold War stabilized into an uneasy stalemate, dangerous, yet predictable. He aged rapidly, health fading, authority absolute, paranoia sharpening decisions. Advisors feared him, allies depended on him, enemies watched him relentlessly. The words Churchill once spoke privately now echoed in public memory. Reshaped by consequence. History had moved beyond beaches and landings, into shadows, silent countdowns. Stalin prepared for the end of his own chapter. Convinced he had secured the state. On 5 March 1953, Joseph Stalin lay motionless. The Kremlin was unnaturally quiet, an era ending. Doctors whispered, guards waited. The system he forged hesitated without its architect. Across the world, leaders reflected cautiously. The shadow he cast still stretched far. Among countless memories, one moment lingered, Churchill leaning forward, speaking of D-Day. That announcement revealed much, courage mixed with caution. Alliance bound by necessity. Stalin never forgot the timing, nor the implications, nor the future it signaled. To him, D-Day confirmed a truth: nations act when interests align, not before. The war had demanded unity, but peace exposed ambition, fear, rivalry. Europe remained divided, borders hardened. Lives shaped by decisions made in guarded rooms. Stalin's response to Churchill had been calm, measured, strategically silent. What he said mattered less than what he concluded. Trust was temporary, power enduring. His legacy endured in concrete walls, ideological divides, nuclear standoffs. The beaches of Normandy became legend, but also a turning point toward separation. Churchill remembered speeches, Stalin remembered outcomes, and history judged both. The Cold War followed, shaped by suspicion, restraint, unresolved wounds. In the end, Stalin believed he had won security, even at immense cost. The world he left behind was stable, fearful, and forever changed.